Let's see where we're at. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. I'm going to be reviewing CDFM Module 1, Competency 2, Manpower Management, outside or out of the 2020 study guide. So we looked at defense business processes and the resource management environment, understanding that the operational chain of command runs from the president, the SecDef, to the combatant commanders in the various regions. So with that, when we talk about manpower, understanding that the resources for filling these manpower requirements also goes to those combatant commanders because of the way how the chain of command runs. On page 125, it goes into the strength levels as of 2019. So you can kind of look and see from the active duty to the National Guard, civilian workforces, what percentage of the strength of the DOD falls on the civilian workforce versus the active component. On page 6, manpower management. So that is the definition. You always want to learn the definitions of the chapters that you're in. So I will read the process of determining manpower requirements for budgetary purposes and reporting manpower strengths to OMB. Remember, everything is tied to the money, right? That's what we're in the business, right? So manpower management is being able to meet that DOD mission with certain number of manpower based on the amount of money we have to pay for that manpower. So everything is tied to resources and money. Let me get my little pen here so I can make notes. All right, so on the top of page 127 talks about the structure. The first bullet you see there says the first priority for manpower is those combatant commands based on the Joint Chief of Staff guidance. So again, what is the role of the Joint Chief of Staff? President is a civilian, SecDef is a civilian, your senior military advisor to those positions or to those individual is your chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. And your chairman is a spokesperson for the service chiefs of staff. So that's why the first priority for programming goes to the combatant commanders based on guidance from the Joint Staff. The rest of the information is straightforward. Civilian personnel can be used only in positions that do not require military. Of course, if you have a TO&E document, table of equipments, or you have an installation document, TDA, and it says that these positions should only be filled with military, well, you can't use civilian. That's all it's saying. It's real straightforward. On page 128, you have some terms and descriptions and definitions. Just kind of review those. So if they say end strength, you know what the definition is, because if they tell you to calculate the end strength, calculate let me see, there's another page that has like the turnover rate and all of that. It's going to come up later. I don't want to jump too fast. Is make sure that you're able to calculate those based on the definition. Mobilization and crisis issues on page 129. The ability to make the transition from peacetime to wartime. So in instances in peacetime, we're doing our everyday work, but mobilization or whenever we have to deal with a crisis, we have a hurricane over here, we need to get the forces, there's different plans in place for that manpower mobilization. So a lot of these I'm not going to read if it's just definition unless I see a particular area where I need to point out. So bear with me. On page 1 to 10, DOD Total Force Policy. The mobilization of all or part of the reserve components to bring the force structure to the levels required, meaning the active forces may not have all the necessary requirements. You may have to go to your reserve personnel. Or the augmentation of active and activated reserve units by non unit reservists, recall retirees, depending on if it's a war going on. Sometimes they got to tap into the retiree force to make sure we have enough people to go and support and defend the Constitution of the United States. On page 1 to 11, the president has certain authority to activate reserve forces, and we need to look at those. So under Title 10, U.S. Code, so let me point out, Title 32 deals with your National Guards. Title 5 deals with your DA civilians. That means if you want information on your DA civilians, that's where you go. And most of your military forces, reserve forces, are governed under Title 10 U.S. Code. That's the law. So what does Title 10 U.S. Code 12304 give the president authority to do to activate forces? When necessary, the president can activate forces if the threat or it's an emergency situation that deals with a couple of conditions. Threaten, let's see, operational mission or emergency involving the use or threatened use of weapons of mass destruction, terrorist attack, or threatened terrorist attack. So weapons of mass destruction, a terrorist attack, actual force, or the threatened or their threatened terrorist attack. The president can activate forces. Activate how many? Activate for how long? So he can activate, may authorize the SecDef. So president can authorize the SecDef and the Secretary of Homeland Security, who manages the Coast Guard, without the consent of Congress. So that's the key thing. Remember, only Congress can declare war. There's some rules there. And Congress does not have to, the president does not have to get permission from Congress to activate these forces in these conditions. He can activate without going to Congress and order them to active duty for no more than 365 days. Follows any unit of the selective reserve, any member of the individual ready reserve. The second bullet has also some limitation. No more than 200,000 members of the selective reserve and the IRR, individual ready reserve. And of that 200,000, no more than 30,000 can be from the individual ready reserve. So president, under Title 10 U.S. Code 12304, the president can activate reserve forces without going to Congress for emergency conditions dealing with weapons of mass destruction, terrorist attack, or threat of terrorist attack for no longer than 365 days, right? So that's what you saw what I do. As you're studying, you go through the notes, you pull out the important information, write it off, circle it, and then you regurgitate what the important things are that you just highlighted. Page 12 are some more definitions of civilian employees that are used during crisis situations. Some civilian positions are deemed mission essential, emergency essential, key employees. So they're already coded so that when that employee is hired, they know that, hey, if this happens from your position, you're going to deploy with the unit based on the position, the job that you took. On page 1 to 13 are those full-time, FTE. You'll hear the term FTE dealing with civilians. Full-time equivalent. That's their full-time hours. So there are different terms and definition. Yes, you need to know these because let's say they say calculate the turnover rate. You go like, well, what's the turnover rate? It's the number of employees who left a position divided by the number of position, the total number of position. So that's for this example, assume 10 people left and there were 100 positions. The turnover rate is 10%. So it's full-time permanent, other than full-time permanent, turnover rate, fill rate, lapse rate, and number of positions to budget. So those are the definition, but based on the definition, you can be required to do some calculation. So make sure you understand the terms and the definition. Page 1 to 14 talks about some DOD incentives, and it starts off with Title V. Remember, earlier I said Title V governs DA civilians. So automatically I know whatever these incentives are, that's who they're addressing on the civilian side. You have the buyout program. So that's the 1, 2, 3, third paragraph. The buyout program or the voluntary separation incentive pay program. And so you have a buyout and you have an early retirement program, which is known as voluntary early retirement, VSIP and VERA. The Department of Defense is permitted no more than 25,000 buyout a year. Remember, buyout, early retirement. So of the buyout, no more than 25,000 buyouts per year. Title V also requires that buyout payment, the money you pay out on a buyout, is the lesser of 40,000 or severance pay. So if the person's severance pay is more than 40,000, the bottom line is 40,000 is the limit. The lesser of 40,000 or the amount of the employee's severance pay. And the last paragraph says an employee accepting a buyout. So if you accept a buyout, what was the limit for the buyout for a year? 25,000 buyouts, cannot be reemployed for 12 months after accepting the money. So if you accept the buyout, 40,000, the lesser of 40,000 or your severance pay, after receiving the incentive, pay the SecDef approves incentive pay unless the SecDef approves an exception to policy. But under the general rule, you have a 12-month waiting out period once you accept the money. Page 1 to 15, when you're still talking about manpower management, right? Personnel, resources. You have an annual list of inherently governmental positions. You have certain position that's inherently governmental, meaning it has to be a military person or DOD person in that position. The list is required. Let's read. So based on OMB's rule, not later than the end of the third quarter of each fiscal year, the head of each executive agency shall submit to the director of OMB a list of positions that are not inherently governmental function. So the end of the third quarter of each fiscal year, they have to submit the list to OMB. OMB reviews it. The director of OMB shall review the executive agency's list for a fiscal year and consult the head of the agency. Public availability. So the list is available to the public. Let's see. All right, so that's good for that one. Competition is required on page 16, right? So commercial activity, we got to compete with your contractors, and you must have a realistic and fair competition. So I'm not reading through that. What I want to point out on page 1 to 17 is A76, OMB circular. So the OMB circulars remember, OMB circular A11, tell me about budget on the OMB side. OMB circular A76 deals with commercial activity, meaning you try to determine, is the job inherently governmental or can we get a contractor to do the job if necessary? So commercial activity is a process resulting in a product or services that is or could be obtained from a private sector. Commercial, getting a private sector, or inherently governmental is an activity that is so intimately related to the public interest as to mandate performance by federal employees. Know the differences whenever you have to. Inherently governmental functions normally fall into two categories. Category 1, the act of governing. The discretionary exercise of the government authority. Example include criminal investigation, prosecution, inherently governmental, CID, we do our own investigation. Monetary transaction and entitlements include tax collection, revenue disbursement, control of the treasury accounts. So we either control the monetary transaction or the act of governing is inherently governmental. Government facilities, we have our own courts, our own jail. So those are inherently governmental categories. Page 1219, again, OMB circular, performance of commercial activities. A lot of this is more information, but under OMB Circular 876, it designed to empower federal managers to make sound and justifiable business decisions. So it's not just about giving a contract out. You're supposed to actually balance. Is it more beneficial to the government to have a contract do certain portions of the job, all of the job, none of the job? It is the policy of the U.S. government achieve economy and enhance productivity, or do we rely on the public sector? Page 1221, that's always good to review the definitions and the terms and the explanation. Conversion to contract, conversion to in-house, meaning conversion to contract, we got a contract to do the job. Conversion to in-house, we're doing it ourselves. But what I want to point out, since most of these terms are familiar to everyone, the one that stands out is most efficient organization. The definition of the MEO is the government structure. The name for the government structure to do the job in-house is the most efficient organization based on the performance work statement. So to do a manpower study, a cost comparison on 1-2-22, if you look at the diagram on the top left, in the top middle, Congress is notified. And there's certain conditions, and I think it'll come up later on. If not, I'll come back to it. Where Congress has to be notified when you're doing a cost performance work statement and you're doing your cost competition to determine whether you go strictly commercial or partly governmental. So Congress is notified, request study contract. You award the study contract because you got to do a study first before you actually go into full-fledged, hey, we're going to all civilian. And you start the study. And you see when you start the study on the diagram on the bottom left where it says start study, the first arrow to the top goes to you develop the MEO, which is the government structure, versus complete a performance work statement detailing everything that contractor needs to do for that job to be successful. So when you do the MEO, you complete an independent cost estimate because you want to know, well, how much does it cost the government to do the job? Because if you've been in a manpower study where someone will come in and be like, well, how many hours does it take you to do your work? Detail exactly all the tasks that you accomplish when you come in today. And coffee break is not one of them. So in the commercial activity, you have the performance work statement that you have to build. That's where you detail every requirement, every step, every transaction that must be accomplished to complete that task. You solicit bids for the contractor. And then based on what the cost estimate is for the contractor, the cost estimate for the MEO, most efficient organization, you do a cost comparison to determine which is cheaper, which is more cost beneficial. And then you look at those non-quantifiable benefits, asking what others are you looking for? Safety, security, those things that you cannot put a dollar amount. So other conditions other than just cost have to be evaluated. What is the risk associated with that decision? So you do that management study on page 23. Excuse me. Cost assessment management study is mandatory. The study shall identify essential functions. So I think this was a little different. So you're looking for the most cost-efficient, cost-effective way to get the job done. On page 24, it talks about the cost comparison. And I think I see something different. Hold on. Yeah. It's not pointed out. But on the slide at the top of page 1 to 24, it talks about that cost comparison. The contractor, non-incumbent of the work, must beat the incumbent, which is the government, by 10% of the government personnel cost for to be considered or be compared. So that's also the length process. The time period for a standard competition, 12 months, may be extended to 18. And if it's streamlined, it can be done in 90 days. So do we keep the military soldiers on the gate, or do we get a contractor? Like when the war kicked off and all the military personnel needed to deploy, then you notice they transitioned to contracts on personnel on the gate. And then eventually they went to GS personnel on the gate. Let's see. Page 1 to 25, this is what I was looking for, of when you notify Congress. Congressional notification in the middle there of page 25. DOD components shall notify Congress of the intention to do a cost comparison if it involves 46 or more DOD DA civilians. So if there's more than 46 DA civilian positions that is being considered in this commercial activity, and you have to do a study, then Congress has to be notified. The DOD component shall notify USD for personnel of any such intent at least 5 working days before congressional notification. DOD employees must be notified, shall consult the employees who will be affected. So you got to let the employees know what's going on. You got to notify Congress if it's 46 or more positions. A76 moratorium. For several years, Congress has imposed a moratorium. What does that mean? DOD subject to government-wide moratorium, most recently imposed FY20, which requires a report and certification prior to any DOD public-private competition. So it's a statute, and the moratorium could be lifted at any time. The moratorium does not, however, apply to competitions under A76 where the work is currently being done by the private sector, and the competition could potentially bring the work in-house. Private to public competition, sometimes known as reverse A76, are still authorized. So you have the term reverse A76. All right, so ethics. Again, you have fiscal law in every section. So this is a part of fiscal law. Ethical behavior. Employees shall not use public office for private gain. We know all this. Employees shall act impartially and not give preferential treatment to contractors, right? So on page 27, we talked about gifts from outside sources. The first bullet, or the second sets of bullet, where the value of the gift, so you can accept gift from contractors. Yes, you can. But if the value of the gift is more than $20, you can't accept it. So anything $20 or less, you can accept it. And within annually, it cannot be no more than $50 total from that same contractor. You can't accept gifts totaling $50 or more over that year from that contractor. Then you have other conditions where the gift is based on family relationship. We knew each other outside of work. We grew up together. We've been best friends. Got nothing to do with the job that you're in. So acceptance of gifts. So $50. Not here, but on the next page, 128, talks about gifts between employees. Gifts other than cash that are valued no more than $10. So if someone's leaving and they're accepting donations, then you're limited to $10, and it usually lists your supervisor. Gifts to supervisors or gifts to superiors. $10. Excuse me. Conflict of financial interest, financial disclosure. Some of the positions require that. So a lot of these is straightforward. 1, 2, 30, recusal. Remove yourself from the situation if you think there's a conflict of interest. Waivers, trust. All of this is straightforward. Seeking employment. The employees engage in actual negotiation. I think there's limitations on accepting employment with a contractor once you leave. So that's what I'm looking for here. Outside activities, this all. Let's go to page 1233 at the bottom, post-employment. There's some restrictions there, so let me find them. All right. If the employee involvement is, in addition, certain high-level officials are subject to a 1-year cooling off period for a period of 1 year after leaving a senior position. The official may not make any appearance on behalf of any person, meaning if you're in the military, you're working for the government, you deal with contracts, so you know the contracts ins and out. When you leave the government, you have a 1-year cooling off period if you meet these criteria. Employees who participate personally and substantially in ongoing trade or treaty negotiation and had access to certain information are also subject to a 1-year restriction. You had access to all this contracting information. You can't then get out the government and be like, oh, I know what they be looking at, so give me a job. Former very senior employees are subject to an additional restriction during the first year, and former senior and very senior employees are restricted to one. So basically, 1-year cooling off period. That's the theme that I'm seeing here. At the top of page 33, honoraria, let me address that. The best way for me to do it is give an example. Let's say I am Helen Thomas and I graduated from Webster University. Webster University is having a graduation and they want to invite me to come speak to the graduating class, and they want to give me an honoraria. They want to honor me. They want to give me some money. Can I accept the money legally? It's yes and no. Yes, if I am an alumni of that school and they invite me to come based on me being an alumni and I graduated from that school, I can accept the funding. If they're asking me to come because I'm Helen Thomas, I'm a budget analyst from the Department of Defense who happened to graduate from this school, once they mention your official capacity, then you cannot accept honoraria. You cannot accept gifts on that premise because it looks like you're getting paid twice for your job that you do. So you got to be careful. So with honoraria, or yes, you can accept gifts, but make sure it's not in your official capacity because you can't get paid salary twice. You cannot supplement. And there, if you look on page 1234 at the bottom, it tells you you cannot supplement your salary with outside entities. For instance, I've also had contractors, people who contract business, who they see what I do with the CDFM, and they work for the government, for the Department of Defense, and they asking me, hey, can you come and teach my people this CDFM? You know, we buy the books, we'll do all this. Can you come and teach CDFM? So I went to JAG and I had to ask, well, can I accept the money? If they don't work directly for my company, they don't work directly for my unit, can I accept? And JAG would say, ethically, no, because they're a DOD contractor. You work for DOD. So the appearance of getting paid twice would be there, or just unethical. Because that means if I do it for one contractor, Now I got to do it, and I don't really have a business. So then I can get myself wrapped up in a lot of trouble if I accept money from a contractor to teach contract personnel the CDFM. So that is Manpower Management CDFM Module 1, Competency 2 out of the 2020 Study Guide. Be sure to subscribe so you can continue to get the updates as I update the new information and try to identify any differences in the new study guide versus the old. So thank you. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM Study Group. Thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you guys again next time.